Hi, my name's Brad Young, and welcome to the Peak Performance Podcast. Today, we're going to be doing episode 23, the psychological effects of coaching styles on athletes. Or you can change that. You can say the psychological effects of leadership style on employees. Or you can say the psychological effects of leadership styles on your family. And so when we step back and look at it, the psychological effects of the coaching style that you present is significant. People don't realize how significant it is. Even, with parenting, your psychological, they have their psychological effects of every parenting style. Parents may not think about that, just like coaches may not realize that until it's too late. That's how coaches get better. That's how parents get better. That's how leaders in business get better is you have to learn to adapt your coaching style and understand it. That's the thing about it. I mean, in the Peak Performance Podcast, what we do is we take theory and we practically apply it. And so in every episode, there's a link in the podcast description. It's to a workbook. It's a workbook you can fill out, you can read, you can go through the information that has the information from the podcast. It's there. And so as we start looking at the psychological effects of coaching styles on athletes, coaches have the power to shape an athlete's mindset, performance, and overall well-being. They can lead, inspire, grow, help them build resilience, and create a lasting impact on these players. The same thing, with your employees, you can create a lasting impact. There's certain supervisors and leaders that I remember from all the years in business and growing up and going through, working my way through the ranks and traveling and doing things that really inspired you to do better. And I can think of the ones that didn't. You think, most of the time we think of all the negative people, but we forget about the positive influences more quickly because, people are more motivated by negative behaviors than they are positive. It's crazy to think that, but it's, you're more likely to do something if there's a negative consequence versus a positive one. So today we're going to look at, the transformative effects of coaching approaches. We're going to discover how to create a supportive environment, ignite peak performance, and foster unshakable resilience in athletes. We're going to do it together. And so first, we're going to look at what are coaching styles. Coaching styles have the power to shape not only the performance, but the lives of athletes. The coach leads and can make a difference in unlocking your potential, driving growth, and building resilience. Each style carries its own strengths, and knowing how and when to use them is the key to success. So let's explore this. Let's take a look at it. And so, the same thing can be said for leadership styles. Whether it's, leadership styles at work, leadership styles at home. We can all think of people that we know that have the different styles and how they do. And then we're going to go over a fictional character that I really love his coaching style. So first, you have authoritarian coaching style. This is all about structure and discipline. I mean, this is a coach with a clear plan, firm rules, and laser focus on results. The style creates a sense of order and accountability, keeping athletes on track for success. And so we've had some really successful authoritarian coaches, in all sports. Democratic coaching style. This is teamwork, ownership, growth. A democratic coach invites collaboration, making athletes ask each other for input and making them part of the process. This isn't just about performance, it's about creating leaders who take responsibility and rise to the challenges together. And so, when we look at a democratic coaching style, you think about it, they're helping create leaders. They're taking people that, that take on responsibility and accept it, and they rise together. Holistic coaching style. This coaching style is really not about the scoreboard. It's about the person. With a holistic approach, the focus is on mental and emotional well-being, fostering balance between personal development and growth. Imagine a coach that sees the whole athlete, not just their stats, and helps them grow in every aspect of life. And so there were three of your coaching styles. And so the coaching style I'd like to talk about for a second is Ted Lasso's coaching style. He's a fictional character, but if his style is a master class in positivity, empathy, and connection. Many leaders could, learn from this by watching Ted Lasso and applying the principles because, you know, I've been in too many places that positivity, empathy, and connection are just not a part of their culture. They see employees as disposable, you know, and the thing of it is the places that see employees as disposable end up losing the most employees. And they're the ones that cry the loudest when nobody wants to go work there. Well, the same thing with coaching. If you do not create positivity, have some empathy and some connection with your players, they're going to leave, especially now in the NIL era, in college football and basketball, well, and baseball too. But you got to create that because kids can transfer and play the next year. They're immediately eligible. They get their NIL money still. So, you've got to be able to connect with them. But Ted blends holistic and democratic coaching. He inspires his teams with kindness, collaboration, and genuine care. And that's the thing about it is, if someone genuinely cares about you. I've seen coaches, I've had leaders that I've been around that had kindness, they wanted collaboration, and they genuinely cared. These are the kind of leaders that you would do anything for. You will follow them. And you got to be a good follower before you can become a good leader. And you learn from those people. And I learned a lot from good leaders that had these characteristics. And so the same in coaching. You can learn a lot from them because kindness, collaboration, and genuinely care about people is something good. Because I could tell you a story from, my friend was talking about a supervisor that was going to give a point to a woman whose house was burning down. It was literally on fire, and she had to leave. They wanted to lecture her about getting a point in their system. Wow. There's no positivity. There's no empathy. There's no connection there. That's an authoritarian style of leadership that place, that I'm talking about, goes through employees, like you change your pants, daily. And they showed no kindness, collaboration, genuine care for that employee. They should have stepped back and, and showed some genuine care and worry about the employee and not just the fact that they were going to be missing an employee for a few hours or a few days, but, the fact that her house had burned down. So when you think about leadership, you got to think about those things, But Ted shows us that great coaching isn't just about winning. It's about building lasting relationships and helping athletes thrive on and off the field. And that's the same thing. With employees, if you can help them thrive while they're working out, you can grow leaders in your own organization. You can grow people. You build a culture that'll last because they feel like they're part of a team. And the same thing, with families and parenting stuff. They feel like they're a part of a team, if they don't feel like they're a part of the team, once the game's over with, they go their own way. People don't realize that. They don't think about that till later on. They don't feel like they're a part of the team. They leave. Employees leave you that way. In transportation, I had low driver turnover. And a lot of it was because I had empathy, understanding, connection. I wrote a book about it. And being able to go through that and understand it and understand that at a young age has made a big difference in my life. And so when we look at Coach Ted Lasso, I really love his style. And I really think a lot of how they built this character because, this character shows the positive traits that a coach needs, a leader needs, that a family needs. Because coaching, it's not about just drills and strategies. It's about transformation. It's about making an impact. The choice is yours, but the psychological impact on athletes, coaching styles have the power to transform an athlete in motivation and emotional well-being. And so you can either do it in a positive way or a negative way. A supportive, positive approach can spark confidence and push athletes beyond their limits, unlocking their true potential. On the other hand, overly critical or authoritarian coaching can crush morale, create a fear of failure, and dampen that passion for the sport. The same thing, in business. When you deal with authoritarian leadership styles, it creates low morale, no confidence, and it makes it where people just don't care, and while that may have been effective 50 years ago, it's not as effective today, not even close. That's the places that they continually go through employees, and it's like they don't seem to understand why. They think they're just going to keep popping up like they're gardening people or something. It's not. They don't come back. So you got to think about it. What kind of coach would you want to guide your team through challenges? And so, when we look at the research, a study in the Journal of Sports Psychology shows that athletes coached with empathy and open communication experience greater satisfaction, less stress, and higher performance. And it's true. Because, when you're confident in something, you have less stress, you perform better. That's what we should all strive for. Coaches can encourage a growth mindset. They can empower athletes to see setbacks as opportunities. That builds resilience and a hunger to improve, because, you're going to lose. That's the thing about it, but it's how you react to it. You got to see those losses as opportunities. I like to talk about how Michael Jordan missed 26 game-winning shots in his career. He missed 9,000 shots in his career, over 9,000. But he hit 25 game-winning shots in the clutch when it mattered. So less than 50% of the time, he hit those game-winning shots, but he was a legend. He is a living legend. He is the greatest basketball player I've ever seen play. I've never seen anybody dominate like Michael Jordan did. Never. And it's because his coach empowered him to see those setbacks as opportunities, allowed him to build resilience and keep getting hungry. But the key is to strike the balance. Challenge your athletes to push their boundaries and reach for greatness. But don't forget, constructive feedback and emotional support are just as important. You got to give them constructive feedback. And, I did some podcasts on, feedback. Make sure it's constructive. Make sure there's some value in your feedback. If you just give someone feedback for feedback, it's not constructive. You're not, offering an answer or a suggestion. You're just offering criticism. That's not constructive feedback. That's just criticism that's endless. People say things like that all the time. They're critical of others, but yet they don't have any solution. So, if you want to complain about a problem, you need to have a solution. You need to be able to provide constructive feedback or shut up. That's how we practically apply that. And so when we think about burnout and anxiety, they're real risks, but you have to adapt to the unique needs of each individual, whether it's an employee, an athlete, or your family members. You create an environment that growth thrives. Together, you can inspire athletes to rise higher, dream bigger, and embrace their full potential. And the same thing with people, with the right coaching, the right help. That's why it's so important when people, get out of high school, they go start figuring out what they want to do. It's so important that they get on the right team, whether it's before or after college, so they understand what real teamwork is. They understand what a good environment is. And I got the pleasure of doing that. Your corporation, was my first, real job. It was in manufacturing, and a charismatic leader, a very charismatic leader that, would work night and day. He really cared. You could tell his coaching style was phenomenal. And of course, he went on to become, very, very high ranking in that organization. Even after they moved, he moved with them. You'd want to take somebody like that. Eric was somebody that you could look at and really, you really have a high level of respect for, because he wanted the best and the true potential out of everybody. And he was encouraging, versus some of the other leaders that I've been around that were definitely not that way. And they got way less out of their employees. They don't think about that. But, the same, coaching and management, are very similar, just like dealing with your family. So here's some real life examples. One of those, I was talking about Michael Jordan earlier, but, the journey with Michael Jordan and his coach, Phil Jackson, is a holistic and mindful approach of coaching, focusing on teamwork and personal growth. Jackson helped Jordan to unlock his full potential. Together, they just didn't build an exceptional athlete. They created a cohesive, unstoppable Chicago Bulls team. This shows how the right coaching style can elevate not just an individual, but an entire group, driving success on every level. And so when you look back at those Bulls teams with Phil Jackson and Michael Jordan, I mean, they didn't have the best players. They had the best coach, and he empowered them. I mean, they worked as a true team. I mean, when you look back at them, you see there's disparities with the stats because Michael could take over a game, but he had good teammates. They had a system and they followed it. They were a cohesive unit, and they won a lot of championships. They did it because Michael Jordan and Phil Jackson worked together. And they built it. They focused on teamwork and personal growth. And, Jordan definitely unlocked his full potential. I've seen him take over so many games. And so, you got to think about this when you're practically applying what we're talking about today. I mean, you got to find the right coaching style to be able to work with people, and, especially in your career, you got to find that right coaching style, because if you're just taking a job for a job and you don't look at any of the other aspects of it, you'll end up short selling yourself every time. You will never live up to your potential. But, what happens when coaching misses the mark? Well, this has happened many times. The wrong approach can lead to burnout, frustration, and loss of passion for the game. Overbearing or overly critical methods have caused so many young athletes to lose their confidence. In some cases, just walk away from the game entirely. Success requires alignment with a coaching style that matches that of the athlete. You got to look at the needs of the athlete, needs of your employee. You got to be able to look at how, progress can move forward instead of moving backward. How dreams can, happen. You got to encourage and want to see people do well and do better. And too many times they don't. I mean, I worked with a guy many years ago, and he acted like everything was a secret because he kept thinking everybody wanted his job, wanted to take over his job and stuff. And, what he didn't realize is I didn't want his job. I mean, I wanted the job I have now 20 years ago. I was looking way past that. When you think about it from that perspective, most lessons are just short term. Most things are short term. I mean, things are stepping stones, and people don't seem to think past that. They don't look at, trying to build people up for their potential. Help other people grow because they want to go past where you're at. I mean, I just think back at your own experiences with coaching or leadership within your job or within your family. When you look at those experiences, that's what shapes you. Was there a coach or someone, leader that lifted you up, fueled your drive, made you believe in your potential? Or perhaps you've faced moments of disconnect that left you discouraged, doubting your ability to grow. These experiences matter. They help us recognize just how critical it is to find the right coaching dynamic, one that empowers us to grow, thrive, and reach heights we're truly capable of achieving. And so as we get ready to end this, some practical application to think about. We've looked at a lot of information today on coaching styles and athletes, and obviously we've looked at leadership styles with employees and family, but when we look at it, you got to discover your own unique learning style and communication preferences to uncover the coaching approach that empowers you the most, that helps you the most, because, you may need the authoritarian coach. You may need the democratic coach. You may need the holistic coach, but you've got to think about it and understand you. And that's what people fail to do a lot of times, is understand themselves. And so that's what the workbook's going to do. It's going to help you break it down and figure out what kind of learning style and communication preferences are right for you, because nobody knows but you. Seek out feedback from your coach with confidence. Speak up about what works for you and what you could do better and what they could do better, because your voice matters. And in some, hostile environments, they don't want you to speak up. They don't want you to do anything. They don't want you to say anything. But you know what? You have to. You got to seek out feedback and speak up to see what you need to do better, or you may need to figure out what you need to do to find another career path or another another company, another organization, another family, whatever it may be. But you got to seek out that feedback and figure it out. Another practical application is reflect deeply on how coaching methods influence your motivation, performance, and growth. You got to learn from every interaction. So when we step back and we look at every interaction and think about all the terrible bosses that we may have had over the years, think about the good ones too. Figure out what you can learn from all of them, because you can learn from the good and bad. When we practically apply this, it's not just about coaching, it's about life. But tune into the moments of frustration or the moments of triumph and ask yourself, what coaching techniques sparked you to these feelings? Because self-awareness is a superpower. Being self-aware and understanding, what works. Because you're only going to take it so long if you have a mismatched style. It's like I talked to a group the other day, and I'm like, okay, these guys, they're right on point. They're my style people. We talked about everything as we were looking at some consulting opportunities, and I'm like, okay, we're on the same wavelength. You got to make sure that, you're on the same wavelength, because I've been in, plenty of other meetings to where I'm like, I don't think so. I don't know that I could help this organization. I couldn't come in, as a consultant and be able to help them. There's nothing I could really do, because they've already made up their mind, which these guys were different, but there's a lot of times I've turned down opportunities to consult, because I'm like, it's just not going to work. Their style, what they're wanting, it's not going to happen. So, we got to take charge and set clear boundaries and expectations with your coach or your supervisor or your family. You lay a foundation for a strong, supportive relationship. And you got to stay aligned with your goals and make sure that, you're making the necessary changes, because your growth is worth the effort. You got to keep striving to be your best self. When we practically apply the psychological effects of coaching styles on athletes, leadership styles on employees, and leadership styles, on families and friends, we step back and we look at it, we got to see how you are behaving and how you're coaching. What can you do to improve? What are you doing well? And this is why, I have the workbook, because we have to step back and look at it, because you may be an authoritarian leader in the wrong industry, and in transportation, I tried to be one at first. I didn't know any other way. I was a hothead, hothead. Their first few months, just a hothead. Everything would just make me angry. And I kept losing drivers. And I was like, man, what I got to do? What I got to do? And I'm like, well, my strengths are being empathetic, compassionate, getting to know these folks, and forming a relationship. It's not trying to be an authoritarian leader. And so the problem is the culture was authoritarian. And so I had to change that. And as soon as I changed that and adapted, I had the lowest turnover rate in the entire organization. But I had to change. And so maybe, it's something that you may need to do to reach your peak performance. You may need to adjust your style and your plan. But anyway, my name is Brad Young, and this has been the Peak Performance Podcast. Thank you for listening. I want you to have a great day.